Have you ever stopped to wonder how exactly a chaotic, muddy island, inhabited by this patchwork of warring Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, managed to birth a unified royal institution that has survived for over 1,000 years? Honestly, it's a staggering question when you really sit down and think about it. Well, welcome to this explainer. I am so incredibly pumped to take you on this journey today as we attempt to distill 800 years of dense, bloody, and absolutely fascinating history. We're going to be looking at the monumental shifts, the brutal betrayals, and the sweeping cultural changes that quite literally shaped modern Britain. Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with forging the English crown, then move through the Norman Conquest, look at law, parliament, and plague, dive into the Wars of the Roses, explore the Tudor transformation, and finally wrap up with uniting the realm. Okay, let's jump right into part 1, forging the English crown. Picture this. It's the 9th century, and these ambitious Saxon kings are just getting comfortable when a massive new threat rolls in, the Vikings. Enter Alfred the Great. Now, instead of trying to completely annihilate the Viking great heathen army, which was basically impossible, he instituted this brilliant pragmatic treaty. He established what's known as Danelaw. It legally divided the country, applying Saxon law in the south and east and Danish law in the north and west. And you know what's crazy? This cultural divide was so profound that you can literally still feel its ripples in British politics and culture today. But Alfred didn't just stop at drawing lines on a map. He fundamentally transformed society. He built these highly fortified towns and heavily encouraged the pursuit of knowledge, even securing the legendary founding of Oxford. But it was actually his grandson, Athelstan, who finished the job. In 927 AD, Athelstan finally pushed the Danes all the way up into Scotland, forcing his rival kings to pledge to him. By officially uniting the Anglo-Saxons, Athelstan became the very first true English king, setting up administrative roots that would outlast him by centuries. Which brings us to Section 2, the Norman Conquest. So, the death of the heirless King Edward the Confessor triggered the single most dramatic cultural shift this island had ever seen. Talk about a whirlwind year. Just look at how fast history moved in 1066. In January, Edward dies. By September, the new English king, Harold, is fighting off a Viking invasion up north at Stamford Bridge. Just days later, he literally has to march 400 kilometers south to face William, Duke of Normandy. In October, at the Battle of Hastings, Harold, the very last Anglo-Saxon king, is shot in the eye and killed. By Christmas Day, William the Conqueror is crowned. We're talking about a total regime change in exactly 12 months. Now, William didn't just win a battle and call it a day. He completely re-engineered the English landscape to ensure absolute, unquestioned submission. He built over 500 of these imposing stone motte and bailey castles, including the famous Tower of London. Then he commissioned the legendary Domesday Book. This was essentially the country's first national census. He wanted to meticulously record every single piece of land and livestock so he could ruthlessly and efficiently tax his new realm. It was absolute control. Let's move along to Section 3, Law, Parliament, and Plague. Skipping ahead a bit to the Plantagenet dynasty, we start to see the monarchy's absolute power violently clashing with the laws of the land. To understand this, we really have to look at King Richard the Lionheart, a famed crusader, absolute military genius, and he was shockingly killed in France by a random crossbow bolt fired by a kid. As the chroniclers dramatically put it at the time, the lion by the ant was slain. This completely altered history because it meant his younger brother, John, took the throne. And John was, frankly, a terrible administrator who just absolutely tanked the treasury and lost all of his family's lands in France. John's massive failures totally outraged the wealthy English barons, so they rebelled and forced him to sign a revolutionary document in 1215, the Magna Carta. Now, here's the crucial takeaway. This wasn't initially some grand democratic vision for the common people. No, it was basically a localized power grab by a bunch of angry billionaires tired of paying for John's mistakes. But by legally forcing the king to be bound by common law, it accidentally became the bedrock of the English Constitution. It was like this massive domino effect. First, the Magna Carta restricts the crown. Then, decades later, during another Baron rebellion, a guy named Simon de Montfort summons knights and burgesses, essentially calling the very first English Parliament. Next, trying to navigate this crazy new legal landscape, Edward I establishes the Inns of Court, which created England's very first professional class of lawyers. 1/3 to 1/2. Just let that sink in for a second. That staggering fraction represents the portion of Europe's entire population wiped out by the Black Death, starting in 1348. It was a literal apocalypse. But historically speaking, It inadvertently triggered an economic golden age for the people who actually survived.
Because so many people had died, there was this massive, unprecedented labor shortage. Feudal lords simply couldn't force peasants to work for free anymore, which effectively ended serfdom. Suddenly, a brand new class of free laborers was born. Plus, since crop farming required way too many hands, landowners pivoted to raising sheep. This forced England into a highly lucrative wool economy that generated staggering wealth and truly laid the groundwork for a burgeoning middle class.
All right, on to Section 4, the Wars of the Roses. Unfortunately, that newfound societal prosperity didn't last long. It was completely shattered by the deeply unstable King Henry VI, who created a massive power vacuum. This plunged the nation into a brutal 30-year civil war, pitting two rival branches of the royal family against each other: the House of Lancaster rocking the red rose and the House of York with the white rose. Guys, this era was a real-life Game of Thrones. We're talking intense family betrayals, massive medieval battles in the freezing snow, and the deeply dark, unsolved mystery of the two young princes who vanished without a trace in the Tower of London. The whole shebang comes to a thrilling climax at Bosworth Field. Richard III, the very last Plantagenet king, leads a desperate cavalry charge directly at his rival Henry Tudor. But Richard gets betrayed on the battlefield by his own allies. Surrounded, knocked off his mount, he supposedly cries out that famous line, "A kingdom for my horse." He was killed right where he stood. Legend has it his crown was found literally propped against a thorn bush, and right there on the muddy battlefield it was placed onto the head of Henry Tudor. That brings us to Section 5, the Tudor transformation. This era was, of course, dominated by Henry Tudor's son, Henry VIII, a guy who started out as a handsome scholar and athlete and transformed into an absolute terrifying tyrant. Just look at this list. It is a perfect visual of his chaotic, desperate quest to secure a male heir. He annulled Catherine of Aragon, beheaded Anne Boleyn, lost Jane Seymour to illness, annulled Anne of Cleves, beheaded Catherine Howard, and only Catherine Parr somehow managed to survive him. It's a pretty stark reminder of a ruler willing to literally tear apart his own family and his country just to get a son. Because the Pope absolutely refused to let him annul his first marriage so he could marry Anne Boleyn, Henry did the unthinkable. He broke from the Catholic Church entirely. But here's the wild part. Henry didn't break from Rome out of some deep desire for Protestant religious purity, not at all. He was a conservative Catholic at heart. The English Reformation was driven purely by personal gain. He made himself the supreme head of the Church of England simply so he could legally grant his own divorce, and in doing so he permanently shifted the religious axis of the entire country.
Talk about religious whiplash for the English people. When Henry's daughter Mary took the throne, this fiercely devout Catholic violently tried to hit reverse on the Reformation, burning Protestants at the stake, which is how she earned the nickname Bloody Mary. It wasn't until her half-sister, the Virgin Queen Elizabeth I, took power that things finally settled down. Elizabeth was a brilliant pragmatist. She engineered this really stable compromise. She created a Protestant church, but kept the comforting Catholic aesthetics and traditions, which successfully calmed all the warring factions.
And Elizabeth's 44-year run? Absolutely legendary. She took England from a fractured, struggling island and turned it into a globally dominant naval superpower. She backed state-sponsored privateers, basically royal pirates, like Sir Francis Drake, to raid Spanish gold ships. And when Spain retaliated in 1588, her navy miraculously crushed the supposedly invincible Spanish Armada. On top of all that, domestically, she oversaw an unprecedented cultural boom, packing theaters for playwrights like William Shakespeare. It was, for sure, a true golden age. And finally, Section 6, uniting the realm. So, Elizabeth dies in 1603 without an heir. This forces a massive geographic consolidation, peacefully passing the crown to James VI of Scotland, making him King James I of England. But just because the crowns were finally united on one head didn't mean the drama was over. James would commission the most famous English Bible in history, but his domestic policies heavily marginalized Catholics. So ask yourself, James thought he had achieved ultimate island-wide peace, but what did 11 men muttering in a dark inn in Northamptonshire have planned for him? I'll give you a hint. It involved a guy named Guy Fawkes, a cellar packed full of gunpowder, and a plot to blow the entire royal institution sky high. What does it tell us? That the moment the crown finally unites the whole island, its subjects immediately try to blow the whole thing to the moon. History is never truly settled, is it? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this helped you wrap your head around the incredible, bloody evolution of the British crown.